everyone, and welcome to this brief but hopefully provocative discussion. This panel has been put together by the Arkitekter Climate Action Network, and ACAN is a network of individuals within the built environment taking action to address the twin crises of climate and ecological breakdown. If you would like to find out more about ACAN, you can head over to stand D40 where they are based, and you can also visit their website and follow them on social media for regular updates. In the last year, ACAN has begun holding a series of discussions and debates under the banner Building Discourse. The purpose of these discussions is to examine contested questions at the intersection of the climate crisis and the built environment. This is the second session in that series. We understand that this is a massive topic to take on in such a short amount of time, but we do hope that the conversation started today will lay a foundation for future discussions, provoke thought, and most importantly, encourage action. As an industry, we tend to get bogged down in the detail without having a very clear idea of where it is we are trying to get to, beyond some vague notion of decarbonizing the economy or using some greener materials. We never really seem to stop and ask ourselves if another way of working is possible, or if we are simply trying to figure out what is possible within the constraints of the now. We must begin to ask ourselves if we can continue as we are, and if the answer is no, what are we prepared to do to galvanize change? As the late great MLK once stated, we must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-orientated society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triples of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Tonight, we have four incredible speakers joining us. The first is Morgan Trowland. Morgan has practiced structural engineering for 17 years and has taken part in several civil disobedience campaigns with Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. In 2022, he climbed the Dartford crossing on the M25, occupying the bridge for 36 hours. He was recently released from prison. Exactly, yeah. He was recently released from prison after serving 14 months for this act of protest. We then have Anna Pagani. Anna is an architect, systems thinker, and scholar. She holds a PhD from EPFL in Switzerland and currently works as a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering at UCL, studying a just transition and housing. Annalisa McSweeney and Zoe Watson come as kind of a package deal. Annalisa is the head of sustainability UK at White Arkitekter. Yeah. She was a founding member of ACAN and coordinated the planning and existing buildings thematic groups. As part of the Arkitekter steering committee, she supports practices in the transition towards regenerative design. And finally, Zoe Watson, who is an architect and activist. She is the head of sustainability at Allies and Morrison and is on the Arkitekter steering group, leading the policy work stream. Zoe also contributes to LETI. Each speaker will deliver a 5-minute provocation in response to the topic, What Future? And then there will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions at the end. Please keep in mind that this is very brief, so do be thinking about your questions as we go and try and make them as concise as possible. Without further ado, I will hand over to the first speaker, who is Morgan.
Hello, hello. That works, nice. Okay, what I'd like to bring here is a little story. Now, anything we say about the future is just a story, really. But some stories gain power as they're retold, if they're retold, and if we act upon them. Now, this story helped me decide to redeploy myself from working in structural engineering to working in civil disobedience. And I heard it from my go-to wise woman, Joanna Macy, in a book of hers, The Work That Reconnects. And the premise of the story is that we've come to the end of the story of ascent, the ascent of man, the end of the paradigm of infinite economic growth, and that's completely doomed. And if humanity's to survive our adolescence and sort of mature into an adulthood, then we will have to go through a transformation into a life-sustaining civilization. And Joanna calls that transformation the Great Turning. Nice bombastic name, but it's pretty big, so the Great Turning. Now, the Great Turning is created by three distinct dimensions of action. And those mutually reinforce each other, and they must all arise together. So the first dimension is holding actions that hold back the harm being done to life. The second dimension is creating new systems to meet our needs in balance with life. And the third dimension is mindset shift and a transformation in consciousness. So a little more detail. The first dimension, we engage in holding actions anytime when people are aroused to come together to try and stop the harm being done to life, to our people, to communities. And that can take the form of things as mild as signing petitions or going on marches or occupying trees, hugging trees, or expose journalism, research, science that exposes the harm we're doing to life. And also caring for those harmed by our destructive systems. Those are all holding actions. But you can only hold back the harm for a limited time. And capital will beat down whatever resistance you put in its way, unless we have the second dimension of transformation, unless we have the creation of new systems. And that is everything that's going all around you. I don't need to speak to that. There's so many ingenious people here working on that, and it's magnificent to see it all here. But that is still not enough, because we will recreate our structural violence in new forms unless we have the third dimension. And the third dimension is a mindset shift and a transformation in consciousness from transformation from viewing ourselves as separate beings in a world of other that we need to dominate and control and keep ourselves safe from, to seeing ourselves as connected beings, seeing ourselves as rooted in the world, and all that lovely woo-woo stuff. But, I'm not saying I've gone far into it, but this is from Joanna Macy, my favorite wise woman. So this third dimension, the transformation of consciousness, it uses insights from a lot of our venerable spiritual traditions, and aligns them with revolutionary insights from science. And I think the most beautiful example is the Apollo 8 photograph. Seeing the pale blue dot from Earth was achievement of the pinnacle of science, but it brings us to an awareness of our deep unity, of a deeper unity. And that is an awareness that so many of our spiritual traditions have held for a very long time. So through becoming rooted in the world, through Dimension 3 changes, we're able to draw on a wellspring of caring and compassion, which means we cannot but take part in holding actions. So it reinforces into that dimension. And that drives us on, motivates us to take part in creating new systems. And as we have more new systems, we have the conditions where we can develop a deeper perception of our connected self. So that is the spiral process of the Great Turning. And I think no matter how bad things get, and it seems that things are getting very bad very fast, and no one, frankly, has a clue just how bad and how soon. But I think the story doesn't change, because no matter what the conditions are, how much chaos we find ourselves in, we are always, if we're alive, we're always going to be wanting to create a life-sustaining civilization together, even if that is in the worst chaos, even if that is under the rubble. So I find that story helps me place what I'm doing in a bigger picture and helps me be at peace with doing the bit that I'm doing and seeing what other people are doing and placing that in the great turning and being at peace with that. So I hope that's helpful, and I will pass on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It was actually very inspiring. As mentioned before, I'm an academic, so I do research and I teach. And I teach in particular systems thinking to architects and engineers, which is quite a difficult contemporary endeavor. We start from The Limits to Growth that was published about 50 years ago, showing that actually our growth was not compatible with the limits of our planet. To reach the current state of our planetary boundaries, quite dramatic, and how we are falling short on a lot of our social foundations. And when I teach this, I look at the students and I can see the lack of agency, or the perceived lack of agency that students have. And this lack of agency permeates the whole sector. When I do interviews with architects, engineers, housing associations, all the people involved in the regeneration of social housing, which is my research topic, I can also perceive this kind of feeling of where things go completely out of control. Residents blame housing associations, that blame developers, that blame shareholders. So it feels like we're part of a system, we're unhappy with that system, we're stuck with it. But paradoxically, this gives me hope. Because whenever I teach or whenever I give an interview, I think, okay, we need to shake people's mind, we need to make them aware of the current conditions. But we also need to offer them and us the opportunity to support our imaginary in navigating what the future will look like and how to achieve it. And for this, there are three types of knowledge. There is system knowledge. What is the current state of our systems? There is the target knowledge. Where do we want to go as a society? And there is transformation knowledge. So how do we go from the current system to the desired one? We're not sufficiently asked about why we're doing things, what is the purpose of actually our actions, what is the future that we are envisioning. However, when we talk about a system, the goal of the system is fundamental to understand how the system and to design the structure of a system. So if we are not aware of the goal of the system we're designing, we expose all of our actions to unintended consequences, which is not exactly great. Architects and planners do this all the time. They constantly think about what is the future, what is my building, and they are going to try to do this in very, very much detail. However, we know since the 60s that we cannot do that alone. That in order to trigger agency, we need to work together with a community and establish together what society generally wants. For instance, right now there is a lot of discussion, last time also in the panel around the building moratorium. So stopping building as paradoxically one of the potential actions that will give us better housing, more quality housing, more accessible housing. But this loses all its power if it's not grounded. It can be grounded in data or eco-anxiety, or it can be grounded in the desire of achieve a society where we all want to live in, independently from our political stance, independently from where we start from. And for this, we need positive examples, which are very rarely advertised in the news. I also know very little positive examples. So in the current poly-crisis that we're facing, we need to train ourselves to imagine away from pre-cooked visions of what the world will look like, and especially trying to keep also a little bit of spirituality, as mentioned before me, and pushing a little bit away skepticism. For me, this starts from education. So it starts by trying to train students to think systemically, to try to understand where we can intervene in the system and expose our mental models to the light of the day and be ready to be criticized about the way we think and about our mental models. And I do this also with different stakeholders, because academia is a little box sometimes if it has big door and there's nothing that goes inside and outside. And so training to try to disrupt received wisdom and to try to understand what can be achieved and who will be the final recipient for it. There are many places where we can intervene in the system, but the most powerful one is certainly to throw ourselves into humility of not knowing. This is a quote from a very famous systems thinker called Donella Meadows. So I believe I have basically maybe 30 seconds left, and so I want to do a small exercise. If we can all close our eyes for a moment, and we're smiling, we're enthusiastic, because there is something very, very exciting outside. What word is outside? Why is that so magic? What is so comfortable about it? Maybe it's a society where housing is a basic service for everyone, where basically we're not at risk of losing our home, there is rent control, our rent is not going to increase, we're agent in our homes, a society where sharing is daily practice, I can leave my kids to my neighbors, I can always ask for help, and the working hours are reduced, I can spend more time with my neighbors, I can spend more time in the land because food is going to be locally produced, it's going to be controlled, it's going to be healthy. A society where the escalator that I'm constantly climbing has finally stopped and I have agency over it, that I can walk at my own pace and with my own means. This is a society of post-scarcity where we need less and thus we have more. Thank you for doing this exercise.
Thank you. That was a really nice way for me to reset and start my pitch. So, Annalise and I are going to talk about, from the perspective of Arkitekter. I'd like to say my day job is Allies and Morrison, and my evening job is Arkitekter. So Arkitekter believe that the current sustainability narrative of climate catastrophe has got it all wrong. We need to reframe the future, not in phrases of doom and gloom, but instead as a climate opportunity. In case you're not familiar with Arkitekter, in the UK, we are a network of over 1,300 signatory practices committed to addressing the climate and biodiversity emergency. Arkitekter sits under the broader banner of Built Environment Declares, which represents over 7,900 signatories globally across 28 different countries. So we've grown significantly over the last 5 years. Since we started in 2019, we have been advocating a shift in mindset from a reductive sustainability approach of doing less bad to one which is regenerative and can have a positive impact on society and nature. Our vision is to establish a built environment planned, constructed and operated within planetary boundaries to deliver environmental justice and to support the flourishing of all life for all time.
So I'm going to introduce a little bit what we mean by a regenerative future, and thank you to Anna and Morgan for already bringing up the ideas of systems thinking. So the basis of regenerative thinking relies on a shift from a linear, extractive and efficiency-based approach to a systems-based approach that will continue to evolve over time. A regenerative future is one in which nature and people survive, thrive and co-evolve. But regenerative thinking is not a new thing. Our mechanistic view of humans as disparate from nature, as Morgan spoke about, only came about in Western Europe in the 18th century. As early as 1880, Ebenezer Howard applied ideas on ecological thinking to human settlements in his book, Tomorrow. And a steady wave of regenerative thinking and writing can be seen from the 1960s. Today, there is a growing movement of regenerative thinkers. Arkitekter have put forward 3 underpinning principles of regenerative design in our Regenerative Design Primer that launches next week. So these are, broadly speaking, ancestors, nature, and people. So firstly, being a good ancestor means thinking long-term about impact, with a view to ensuring planetary health for those that come after us, embracing a culture of continuous transformation and learning. Co-evolving as part of nature would mean including nature as an active stakeholder in decision-making, operating in symbiosis with mutually beneficial outcomes, and devising a circular, flexible, and adaptable flow of resources. And creating a just space for people requires a shift of focus from constant economic growth towards valuing planetary health. This means providing true social connection, economic opportunities, and well-being for everyone.
So now we've given you an idea of what a regenerative vision of the future should look like from the perspective of Arkitekter. We'd like to quickly share some of our recent actions on how we intend to help the industry get there. both from a top-down government and policy levers perspective, but also from a bottom-up industry action-based approach, because we really do need to be pushing from every angle to change the system. So from a top-down level, we are just about to launch our Building Blocks Manifesto. We've got a nice little poster here. If you fancy scanning the QR code, you will also get to see it online. But we will be launching it next week in Parliament, and we have Julia Barfield, Kevin MacLeod, and Kate Rareworth from Donut Economics speaking on that. So do check it out. And the manifesto aims to turn a climate catastrophe into a climate opportunity, and is a call to action for the next UK elected government. And there's some really great stats here about all the benefits that we could be bringing to the NHS, to the economy, and to jobs. So it's really, really worth investing in. The manifesto paints a bold ambition for a regenerative and circular future where waste is seen as a valuable asset, not a problem, nature as an integral part of our cities and ecosystems, and the construction sector as a bountiful resource of meaningful jobs in a growing circular economy. Perhaps more radically, the manifesto also calls for action in 4 foundational areas outside of the built environment, including a nationwide climate literacy campaign, alignment of economy with well-being and planetary limits, provision of safeguards to protect future generations' ability to act, and finally, the implementation of democratic reforms to foster climate leadership, which we are desperately lacking at the minute. We believe the building block policies and their foundations would provide cascading positive impacts on people's homes, neighbourhoods and livelihoods, increase social justice by distributing wealth fairly around the nation, as well as restoring nature. Who wouldn't want this?
So then what are we doing about the bottom up? And this speaks to shifting the goals of the system and what we're rewarding. So Arkitekter, together with Arkitekter Today, have launched the Regenerative Architecture Index. And this is a means of benchmarking architects on regenerative working practices, projects, policies, and actions. The Regenerative Architecture Index aims to celebrate the glimpses of a regenerative future that are visible today, thinking about regenerative architecture as constantly evolving over time. So it's not about celebrating any one finished project, but recognizing elements of practice that are incorporating regenerative mindsets. The index is not a conventional awards program. The focus is educational rather than competitive, with an evolving series of activities based on sharing experience and acknowledging challenges and mistakes. Participating practices are invited to respond to questions under the same 3 broad headings that we have in the primer. So those are ancestors, nature, and people. The idea is that learnings collected from the Regenerative Architecture Index will feed into subsequent iterations of the primer, and its role is to inform, inspire. So the more people who are engaged with it, and the more information that it contains, the more effective it will be. Entries close in May this year, and where we aim to publish the index and have a celebratory event in September. So we know that there's so much jargon, there's technicalities, there's metrics, and they make this kind of idea of a sustainable future seem really overwhelming and a huge challenge ahead. But what we can all agree on, very much related to your story, is that the things that really matter to people are community, safety, a sense of purpose and well-being. So we really think that a regenerative future gives a positive vision for us all to strive for.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all our speakers, and in perfect time as well, with a minute to spare. So amazing work. I am going to kick off the discussion part by asking a question that came to me as you were all talking. So the kind of theme of all your talks, or the thing that underpinned it, seemed to be this idea of community and collectivism as a way forward, away from this current crisis. But in this profession, very rarely do we actually name the main system of domination that is keeping us where we are, which is capitalism. And I was wondering if you think that as a profession we address capitalism as a kind of system of domination enough, and if you think that everything that you're saying is possible under that system of capitalism that we currently have.
In a word, no. I think there's, what we need to try to achieve is removing the idea, and you spoke to this very well, Anna, that under capitalism, the goal of the system is growth, forever growth at any cost. And that is what's got us into this mess today. So we need to start to kind of understand what other systems are available to us. And we speak a lot about kind of well-being economies and how do you start to have metrics that value things that aren't about GDP and economic growth. So that is something that we really think need to shift. And in that is, it evolves out different ways of production and creation and co-creation. And that's something we also really speak about. And it allows kind of more inclusivity, and it's less about what capitalism is doing, which is making disparate opportunities and rich get richer and then at the cost of everything else and the planet.
I totally agree, of course, with what you just said. And I just want to add one thing. Like, it may sound, again, counterintuitive, but yes, it should be possible with the current system because we need to start from here. And if we say it's not possible in the current system, we put away our agency and say, there's no way, we need to change the system, it's bigger than me, I will never manage to do so. So the answer somehow partially should also be, yes, it is possible in the current capitalist system to transform the goal of the system. And it can be done via strategies at different levels, more at the governmental level, more within communities, so bottom up. It should happen at different levels and it should happen within the current system. Because so often, again, in my interviews, I see that people feel this lack of power, this lack of age. I would like to do things differently, but if I'm too provocative, I will not get the project, I will not get the funding. How can my architectural practice survive? If I do not demolish and densify in order to cross-fund social housing, how am I going to provide social housing?
I think we are in the grip of necro-capitalism. I'm not sure if you've read the book by George Sarkakridis, but I have a much darker viewpoint than I think some of my panelists. But it doesn't change the way to live your life, because even if there is very little hope, it's still the best thing to do in life is to try. That forms community, and that gives your life meaning and makes life enjoyable, no matter how bad things are going wrong. I have formed so much community over the last 4 years of struggle, and that cannot be taken away from you. And that is why, even if it were totally hopeless, you should still try to create systems that transcend the existing reality, because it's just a more enjoyable way to live.
Yeah. I'm going to zip around with any questions in the audience, if that's okay.
Right, so capitalism is a problem. My question is, if we look at supply chains that I've been doing for the last 10 years, and the solutions, well, not all of the solutions, some of the solutions are in the form of renewables, some might be timber, some might be recycling. My point of contention is on the renewables, because I've been asking, and way back before lockdown, I was going to the ACAN events every year for the last 5 years, asking these same questions, which is to go green, to go net zero, for renewables, for the solar, the wind, the electric, the drones, everything. Where are all these parts coming from? And no one seems to know. Oh, they're from a factory somewhere in China. I says, no. Where are they really coming from? Because you're not going to find anyone mining these parts or resources in Lancashire. That happened 100 years ago. These parts are coming from Central to Western Africa. Siddharth Kara, international Indian journalist, was the first person to get privy access to watch 200,000 men, women, and children in one mine only of thousands. My friend from Congo posted this exactly. This was, this pales into comparison any genocide atrocity that has happened in the last few months, as bad as it is dance are evil. He posted millions of us Congolans and Ghanaians and other Africans are being dragged through this slaughter. And for your electric cars, this is what he's telling me. And I was like, bro, thank you. Because I'm not in Africa. I needed someone from Africa to come on LinkedIn and tell me that, and tell everyone that. So my question is we're divesting from capitalism, but have we ended up wittingly or unwittingly replaced it with green capitalism. And how are we going to deal with that when all the panels I go to, all the events I go to, I don't see no black or brown people on the stage. They own all the resources. Look at what's happening in Africa right now. Niger, Burkina Faso, they're saying enough is enough. You're taking all our materials at cut price. You're not giving us the real value. And the fear for the global north is, give you another 5 years' time, when one country kicks off Africa, all the other countries thinking, hold up, what's going on here? We want real price as well. Then we're going to be left in a real problem. We don't own anything. We don't grow anything in the British Isles. Nothing. I might be even moving to Africa in 10 years' time because that's where the money is at. That's where the resources are at. But the question for now is, how can we talk about sustainability? How can we talk about Gaza when before Gaza for 50 years, the mass rape and pillage of that continent just so we can go green? Thank you.
I'm just going to offer up a quick answer to that because everything you're saying, I think, is very astute. And I think the problem is a lot of the time we try and look at these systems of domination in isolation. So when people look at capitalism, they're looking at just capitalism. But we need to understand that along with patriarchy, along with white supremacy, along with classism, all these systems aid and abet each other, and all these systems hold each other up. So everything you're talking about is the effects of colonialism and white supremacy on this idea of green capitalism, and it's the effects of colonialism and white supremacy. So if we're just looking at capitalism in isolation and we're saying we need to look at capitalism, actually we need to look at the other systems of domination that uphold capitalism. Otherwise we're just going back in circles. And once we've tackled capitalism, we're going to be like, hang on a minute, patriarchy needs to be looked at. Hang on a minute, we need to look at the class system. So unless you're looking at all the systems of domination together and you're doing it through an intersectional approach, we're just going to keep asking the same questions in a different format every few years.
Thanks for raising that because, it's indeed, I think that what you also just said and what you heard across the panelists is this idea of systems and interdependence and interconnectedness. And also when we talk about colonialism, these are all characteristics of systems in which we're stuck in, such as history. Systems are, for instance, history dependent. It's very difficult to, they say, unscramble an egg. So there is a history there that is bringing us here, and they're tightly coupled. However, for us, it's very difficult to understand systems. We're in this polycrisis right now. It's very difficult to understand where to interact and how to interact, and we keep leading to fixes that fail. But the real answer to that I can give is degrowth. We cannot keep growing and thinking that just greening our growth is going to solve all problems, of course. And degrowth does not also mean a completely unplanned, complete economic crisis and so on and so forth. We need to design this degrowth in a way that is just, in a way that rebalances across, in general, the planet and across different people and different needs, that promotes equality. We cannot simply think, oh, well, now I have a solar panel in my home, I can use as much energy as I want and just continue extracting lithium and so on and so forth. But to do that, we need new models. And that's why we need this discussion on new futures, because we need less to have more. We need much, much less to have more. And this is just a hint, because I just want to let other people react, but I fully agree.
I mean, I was just going to contribute to that and say, I think everything that we're speaking about here and trying to speak and bring in the term regenerative is because we're trying to bring it away from a very single-minded view of a sustainable future that equals, photovoltaics and electric vehicles, because it isn't just about that. It's much more about, as you're describing, the systems in which we operate, and that we need to change to reduce consumption. And in doing that, we also need to think more about where things are coming from. How do we make things more local and resilient? How do we look at the responsibility through supply chains? And it's not just about people, it's about toxicity, it's about the ecosystems that we're impacting. And it is a much more holistic view of the future that encompasses all these complexities. And it is a really big, complex challenge. But I think, as you've just alluded to, it's the degrowth part is really important, because it's a shift away. We can't just have a silver bullet and say, and I find it quite conflicting actually when you walk around places like this and there's so much innovation, but it comes back to the goals of the system. If we're innovating under the wrong goals of the system, then they're just going to get absorbed into the current way of being. And actually, there's a lot of work. We've been looking a lot at Bill Sharp's 3 Horizon model, and I won't go into that now, but the 3 Horizon model kind of looks at what the Horizon 3 vision is, what the current business as usual trajectory is, and where those interplays are happening with Horizon 2 that has the potential to take us into that next vision. I'm explaining that really badly in a very short amount of time, but look it up and I'll give Zoe a chance to speak.
That's all right. One other place I would point you to look is Donut Economics' Kate Raworth. It gives such a great vision of an alternative economic model. So it talks about a social foundation which includes everyone. So we're not just mindlessly growing a system, but we're actually focusing on the people and the values that we're trying to achieve. So both it has a social foundation and an ecological ceiling. So if you don't know much about donut economics, check it out.
I want to thank our colleague at the back for bringing our attention to those minds. I think I've seen some of the videos, and we need to look at that. We need to have that held up in front of us, because that is necro-capitalism. We have currently a global system it seems sentient, and it will divert all of our activities into annihilating life. And it is ingenious, and I think that's why the term is used, it's sentient, because it'll take every new system we develop. If we only look in dimension 2 of cunning new systems, it will turn all of that into new ways of annihilating life. And that just can't go on. And it's why I bring up the Great Turning story, because it is only through the third dimension of mindset shift, of being connected and weeping with those people in the mine in the Congo, that we can ever hope to not recreate that violence again and again and again. And I go back to the Great Turning story because of taking part in a holding action. While I was in prison, some Ugandan students were trying to stop a pipeline in Uganda, and they wrote a solidarity statement with us, with myself and Marcus, for being on the bridge. And they were beaten up by police and tortured weeks later. But we still write to each other, came into connection through that holding action. And you see there that potentially is the spiral. There's I'm just trying to illustrate little examples of how those 3 dimensions reinforce each other. And I think that's one thing that gives me some hope.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the discussion, and fully agree with everything you've said. I wanted to highlight, I think, what Morgan was talking about, was a change in consciousness. So in order to enact this degrowth future, if we can make it happen, I feel we're in a meaning crisis, a cultural crisis. We don't understand what we're supposed to be doing, and this leads to us, investing in buying fancy things to make us feel good when it's missing our real humanity. So I wondered if you could share your thoughts on how we can bring about a changing consciousness.
Quite a big question. I'm going to reflect on a Regenerative Design Lab that Annalisa have been on. We've been meeting in the woods and sort of talking about these things exactly like that. And I feel like being in a space, basically giving ourselves more space to have these types of conversations, be around people who share our values, to kind of be safe in places in nature and kind of reconnect, is really important to kind of having that kind of shared purpose and meaning. I think it's all deep down inside us. I don't think we need to reinvent it. I think it's inherently human, all the things that we strive for and what we aspire to is kind of just part of us. So I think it's really just finding the time to reflect and connect to things that matter, whether it's your family, whether it's the places that matter, I think is how you create that consciousness.
I also think connecting to new and different groups of people, because, for example, Morgan now has that connection because of a connection that he made, and your friend pointing out what's going on in Congo. We tend to live in echo chambers that kind of reinforce the things that we're already doing, and then it just takes one new person and one new idea to really spark something in you. So I think constantly trying to reach out and branch out from maybe your circle of safety in order to expose yourself to different ways of living and thinking is vital in the times that we live in now.
Perhaps also putting things in perspective. In the sense, when I made you do that exercise, closing the eyes, I would be very curious to know whether there was somebody who didn't want that future at all, who didn't want to have safe housing, who didn't want to have healthy food, who didn't want to have more time. That's the incredible things. We all want that. And actually, we think that capitalism has always been, it seems like we're trapped in this, but if you put that into perspective, you see that it's relatively recent. Like, it's not something that has been there since the ages of time. The great acceleration, or the way that we call it the Capitalocene, hasn't appeared so long ago and is entrenched in our way of being and so on and so forth. So there is that desire of living in a different world. It's just there. We just need to try to find ways to cultivate it, to trigger it, to activate it. And I think that this is already a starting point. Tonight is a starting point, this kind of conversation, when you're going to go back home and think about it and talk about it to your friends and talk about it to your colleagues at work. All of this is part of that transformation. But I think that we must all know that we deeply, independently from what, again, as mentioned before, a political stance or anything, we all want a better future that looks like the picture or exercise that we did before. And I think that's the encouraging point.
So, yeah, I'm just wondering about kind of how we deal with kind of scaling this up. There are a lot of people who have a vision for kind of positive, sustainable and/or regenerative things. A lot of people working towards that. XR kind of talk about this kind of 3%-ish tipping point. But it seems that what we have is a system that actually really is very strongly trying to perpetuate the way things are, that panics over growth being less than 0.5% positive. That's still growth. And kind of like, you know, it's like how it feels kind of almost futile to kind of chip away at that almost. It seems like we've all been trying this for, I don't know, 20, 30, maybe some people in here more than that years, and nothing's happened.
Just to say, I often feel the same, and especially, you know, in academia, we often get this clash in our faces. Wow. I mean, The Limits to Growth was written in 1972. How is that possible that we just keep it? However, I think that there is a subtle thing. It's also this thing about looking at positive examples. Things are actually changing. And this kind of conversation is already a sign that things are changing. So there is a transition that is happening, and the way in which it's going to manifest itself is either in a design way, so we're going to transition out of the current model, or there's going to be a collapse. But what I hear often is that the society underneath is getting ready. So even if the current model is going to collapse, we're ready to react. We're down there. We have the structure ready. We're getting set up. And if that is the motivation that we need, that's at least what motivates me. Thinking, okay, I'm setting that up. When it collapses, I'm ready to react.
Understanding the power of community and connections and just talking. And actually, we're here having this conversation today. If everybody goes home and has this conversation with their families, and their kids start to have this conversation with their friends at school, who have conversations with their families, I think we need to have this kind of cultural wave and a cultural shift happening. And that is best done by just kind of talking and normalizing this conversation and trying to start this kind of bottom-up ripple effect. At the same time, I mean, Zoe spoke to the fact that we at Arkitekter recognize that the top-down and bottom-up requirement for this to happen. So it's also engaging in the powers that you have and the agency that you have with things, you know, connecting with your MPs and telling them what's important. Where there's opportunity to engage in decision making, use that right and that ability to engage, and then keep talking about these things.
Very simple thing, but I think it's incredibly important to feel our grief for the world and feel it with other people. Like, I'm blubbing away doing it here. But well, it's terrifying, but it breaks you open. And once you have, you can't help but do what is presented to you. Just make sure you're around wise people.
I'm very aware that we ran over. I'm very sorry. But thank you so much for attending. I know that it was brief and there was a lot to digest. Please do join us at the bar now. ACAN do have a tab. I'm sure a lot of people want to continue this conversation. So do join us at the bar, and thank you again for attending. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you to ACAN for putting this together.